All right, do-over. We are here for When Thor Are Writing tonight. I have guest Rosiee Thor, author of Tarnished Are the Stars, out October 15th. Available for pre-order now. We'll get yourself a copy. And
my Amazon rank has tanked lately. So if anyone wants to pre-order it, like one person pre-orders it, it'd probably go up like a lot.
See there, call to action.
Yeah.
Save Rosie's Amazon rating.
It doesn't matter. Amazon rankings really do not matter at this point.
For our egos, they do.
Yeah, there you go.
And, all right. Jason still has not. Wait, has somebody said a thing? Go back. It won't let me like go back to all of the comments, which is quite annoying.
Jason just said yes a while ago, and then that's it.
Okay.
Oh wait, no. Aha.
I don't know. Okay, well that's annoying. So yeah, it won't let me go back to all of the comments. Hopefully that's okay. I apologize for all this.
Just carry on.
Stuff. We'll just carry on. If you post a question and I don't see it, maybe direct message me. So we're going to be talking about The Princess Bride tonight for the most part, because the poll basically indicated people aren't too interested in Buffy, which is sad. But we're going to start by talking about character archetypes, which I wrote a blog post about on Tuesday. So if you go to my website, accountabilitymuse.com/blog, it's the first post. And that's a little crash course on character archetypes in relationship to the hero's journey. And a quick list of what those are is the hero, mentor, threshold guardian, herald, shapeshifter, shadow, ally, and trickster. And so let's start talking about who in The Princess Bride is who. So archetypes tend to get written as if one character is one archetype, and I hate that. I like considering archetypes more of like hats or masks that characters can wear at any given time. So think of Loki from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He wears many different archetypal hats over the course of the entire Marvel canon. So that's how I
would argue that he doesn't.
Really?
He's the shapeshifter. He's one archetype.
True. But I would say he also can wear like a mentor hat on occasion. Like that's part of it. Like
I would say that that's part of his archetype as the shapeshifter.
Right. So, okay.
It's because he's not only just a literal shapeshifter that can turn into a snake and a horse and whatever. He's also a chameleon of personalities, and he has many different roles that he plays depending on who the hero is.
Right.
And I think that that's part of what makes him a successful archetype of the shapeshifter.
Right. I guess the way I think about it is functional, because like the trickster archetype functionally, yes, operates in a certain way, but in one scene, if he's behaving in a certain different aspect of his tricksterness, I'm like, oh, he's operating as a mentor in this scene, and he can because he shapeshifts. But I like thinking of like all characters that way, that they can like function differently from scene to scene.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
All right, so I guess let's start at the top with Wesley, or the Man in Black. What archetype would you label him with?
I mean,
flatline.
Yeah. I guess he's the hero, but like only in the most boring sense of the word.
Right? He is.
Like I know we all love Wesley, and we all love a young Carrie Ells with a weird mustache, but he's not really he doesn't do a whole lot of heroics.
Right. He gets the job done, and then he needs help to finish getting the job done.
Well, I think that he is you know what? He's a mentor.
Ooh. Well, that's interesting. That like blows up my Buttercup theory.
He's a mentor. That's what he is.
He's a mentor. Yeah, he totally is.
Yeah.
All right.
So let's explain that so that people know what we're talking about. So the mentor character is around to give sage advice and to shepherd the other characters into the roles they're meant to play. So we have famous mentor characters are like Dumbledore or Gandalf. They're usually old wizards.
Yeah.
And they're shepherding the other characters into the roles they're supposed to play in order for the story to unfold.
Right.
The mentor character usually has to die or become incapacitated at some point during the story so that the hero can grow on their own without the mentor's help.
Right.
I would
look who
argue,
becomes mostly dead.
Yeah. Well, I would argue that this happens twice. And depending on who we choose the hero to be, it still counts, because for Buttercup, he dies
Mm-hmm.
and disappears and is not there to help shepherd her toward understanding what true love is, and she falls because of that, and she ends up in this marriage to Humperdinck. And then later on he dies again, and it forces Inigo to become more of a leader character.
Mm-hmm.
And Inigo actually rises to the occasion, grows as a person, learns how to lead, learns how to take action for his own plans, and then is successful at it.
Yep.
So we actually have two arcs there that are polar opposites of each other. For what happens when the mentor leaves.
Yeah. So let's back up a little bit and talk about Buttercup, because I went and rewatched the film earlier this week, and I went in with the theory. I'm like, wait, is Buttercup secretly the hero? And I've just never noticed, because they actually do a really great job of setting her up for this huge character arc, because at the beginning of the story, she's Buttercup, and she's very entitled, and then realizes she's in love with the farm boy, and she remains entitled, and then it has a broken heart and becomes incredibly depressed and can't have a life, and she just, instead of killing herself, she just gets engaged to the prince, like you do. But the whole story is about true love, and I'm going to try not to say true love over and over again.
We should definitely
We should just every
time.
True love. And the whole story is about the power of true love. I don't know if I can do that.
We can't do it.
True
no.
love. I can't. It's about true love and the power of it, and how, regardless of the circumstances, like, if you let true love do its job, things are going to end up okay. Like, it's a fairy tale. That's what this story is about. And Wesley, the man in black, or the Dread Pirate Roberts, totally gets it. And so he comes back for Buttercup when he finds out she's been kidnapped, and saves her. And it was actually really interesting watching the scene where he confronts her for having like given up on him and then getting engaged to someone else. I was like, whoa, how does he still love her? Because I would be like super pissed in that situation. But Buttercup is continually presented with the opportunity to have faith in true love, and to let it save the day, and she gives up on it, and she only believes in it when it's convenient, and then when things go poorly, she gets depressed or wants to kill herself. Like, at the very end, she thinks she's married Prince Humperdinck when she technically hasn't. She hasn't said I do. She thinks she has, and Wesley did not show up, and all of her hopes and faith in true love are dashed, and she's literally about to kill herself when Wesley speaks from the bed behind her. And the whole story just set this up for her to be like, yeah, I'm going to believe in this no matter what, and then she never actually gets there, and it's so frustrating.
It's a prime example of the narrative promising something to the reader or watcher and then not delivering.
Yeah. But my question, okay, here's a question for you. Because, like, yes, I love character arcs, but would that movie in particular actually be better and still on theme as like a campy fun fairy tale if she did have a full character arc. I feel like that would be a jarring inclusion if she did actually fulfill that.
think that you and I have been trained to believe that it would be a jarring inclusion for a female character to have a full character arc. And we have been brainwashed by the patriarchy into believing this. And that if she had had a full character arc, it would have created a more dynamic character arc for the others. Because we have it's not just that she doesn't have a full character arc, it's that she doesn't have a full character.
Right.
She is a caricature of damsels in distress. She does not actually have a personality beyond falling in love with Wesley after being entitled and then giving up on everything. That's her entire personality. We don't know anything else about her. We don't know what she wants. We don't know anything. She's completely devoid of personality other than these basic, super basic things. Whereas the other characters all have backstories. They all have personality flaws. They all have dynamics with each other that are really interesting. And I think that not giving her a full character arc and a full personality is the easy way out. If she had had her own arc and her own personality and had actually taken action in the story, what we could have had was a very dynamic mirror image of her and Wesley's stories. And that's what I would have liked to see if I was writing it, is that I would have wanted her to have given up on love. Wesley comes back from the dead, supposedly, and basically scolds her for it. And then they fall into the fire swamp and things go relatively well for a while. And then when he's taken from her again, she remembers that lesson and she saves him, is what should have happened. That's how I would have written it, but that's okay. I didn't write it, and it's a classic, and people will get mad at me for saying anything about that. But I think that not giving her an arc is in part why she and Wesley are both not the main characters of the story.
Right. So that's really interesting because, like, I totally agree with you, and I also feel like the other characters didn't quite get full arcs either. Because I don't, for instance, if we look at Inigo Montoya, I don't consider a revenge arc in itself to be a full arc. It falls flat at the end for me. And it's interesting because at the end, it's clear that Inigo is going to become the next Dread Pirate Roberts, which is such like a tease. Because I'm like, I want just a little bit more to like get some sort of conclusion there.
So I disagree. I think his arc is complete. And I view it not as a revenge arc, but as a journey from follower to leader. At the beginning, he is a follower. He is following, what's his name?
Isn't it Vicini?
Vicini, yeah. He's following Vicini's orders. He's doing everything he's told, and he's just a sword for hire. He wants to get revenge, but it's sort of this kind of nebulous idea of like, I'm going to go get revenge eventually. But for now, I'm doing this. And he has built friendships, and this is great. And then when Vasily dies, he goes after Wesley because he thinks, okay, well, I need a new leader. So he goes after Wesley to save him. He does, in fact, save him, but Wesley is not in a position to actually take leadership. Wesley is unable to move his arms and legs. You know, he's not the same fighter that he was at the beginning of the story. He still has leadership qualities, like he's able to come up with a plan, but from there, it's about Inigo taking control of his own narrative. As they're storming the castle, Inigo sees the six-fingered man, and there's this moment where he kind of checks in. It's not a verbal moment, it's kind of a visual moment where he checks in and kind of goes, am I going to go save the day or am I going to go get revenge? And he realizes that his path is the revenge path. And he takes control of his own narrative to go fight the six-fingered man. And that's a choice that he's making to follow his own story. And what I think at the end, what that is that's Wesley recognizing that Inigo is more than just a sword arm. He's actually a leader and he can do this. And by making him the Dread Pirate Roberts, Wesley is going to pass the mantle on to him and allow him to take control of his own story.
I'm sold. No, that makes complete sense. I've never thought of it that way as a leadership arc. And then it is a conclusion to the arc when it becomes clear he'll be the next Dread Pirate Roberts, because then he'll be captaining his own pirate ship.
I mean, don't get me wrong, I would watch the hell out of a Dread Pirate Roberts Inigo movie, but like but his arc's over at that point. He has gotten what he needs in order to become the person he was supposed to be from the beginning.
Right. I'd be curious in a Wesley prequel of him becoming the Dread Pirate Roberts, because like
animated series,
right? Like stuff would have gone down because Wesley was not the man in black when he left the farm at the beginning of the story. So
what would be interesting about that story is that in order to be true to the character of Wesley and to fulfill the story that The Princess Bride puts forth, is that Wesley could not have a love interest in that story other than Buttercup. And I think that most modern storytelling would require that of him. And that would be a very interesting thing. I would love to see Hollywood do that and not screw it up.
Right. Well, I think the way my brain is working is I would do basically a buddy cop kind of story, which is essentially a rom-com, but platonic. That's perfect. Like I actually I enjoyed the Han Solo prequel film that they made. I wasn't really a fan of the actor who played Han Solo, but I enjoyed the film. I was pleasantly surprised because I went in with low expectations and they actually delivered. I enjoyed it. However, I came out being disappointed because I thought the obvious answer to a Han Solo origin story was to do a buddy cop story with him and Chewbacca where they hate each other forever and
or even him and Lando.
Yeah, they kind of did that a little bit in this one, but I feel like the origins of him and Chewbacca were just like so ripe to have a rich backstory because of how partnered they are as friends and comrades. Like just like flesh it out. Anyways, that's just how I wish they would have done it. All right, so this is really interesting talking about The Princess Bride because it is such a beloved film. I adore it, and it has such endearing characters. Like overall, like you remember the whole cast when you think of Princess Bride, right?
Yeah,
think of everyone.
But it doesn't follow a traditional storytelling archetype.
No, but it doesn't. And so what I want to talk about next, because we've already talked about arcs and stuff, is how you make such interesting, endearing characters in a non-traditional story.
So I'm a huge fan of character-driven fiction. I think that my favorite stories are always the ones where the characters are driving the story rather than the story driving the characters. I almost always prefer it's why while I like superhero movies, they're not my favorite thing in the world, and I'm not as gung-ho about them as everyone else seems to be. And I enjoy them, don't get me wrong. Thor Ragnarok is a masterpiece. But the reason why Thor Ragnarok is a masterpiece is because it's character driven. And that's the difference between, in my opinion, or the movies that I end up liking and the ones I don't, because they follow situations where, yes, the character has to do something, but how are they going to do it? How is this particular character going to get through this situation? Right. Because as we see, so using Thor Ragnarok as an example, I'm assuming most of the people watching have seen it. We have a situation where several characters we know have all ended up in the same situation. So Hulk, Loki, and Thor, as well as Valkyrie, have all ended up on this trash planet through various problems, and they all end up on this planet, and they all end up dealing with the planet in a completely different way. So we see Thor fighting to escape. We see Loki adapting to blend in. We see the Hulk fighting to stay. And then we see Valkyrie kind of doing a mirror image of what Loki is doing, where she's adapting, but she stands out.
Yeah.
And so there's all these different characters who are taking the exact same situation and treating it differently. So what we find is that this situation does not ask one thing of our characters. It's not, if you don't defuse the bomb, you will explode. It's, well, now you're on this planet, what are you going to do? And the characters drive the narrative through the choices that they're making based on their motivations, rather than making choices based on very specific life or death situations.
Right. And to take it back to Princess Bride, my favorite example is the sword fight between Wesley and Inigo. Because the whole example. Setup for that scene is like, yes, Inigo has a job to do. He has to prevent the man in black from getting to the princess. Mm-hmm. And the man in black needs to get to the princess. But they are playing with each other, both starting left-handed with their swords and having a full conversation. They're on a first date, essentially, while they're sword fighting. And that's what makes that scene so memorable and endearing. Like, if it had literally just been a scene of violence and a fight scene, nobody would remember that. No one would care. But it has so much more interest and engagement because the characters are so unique and they're approaching the scene from a multifaceted lens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a famous example of this, and I'm trying to remember what movie it was, and I'm almost certain it was Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
But I could be wrong. But there's a famous fight sequence that happens in Lord of the Rings, and I can't remember which one it was. So this is a terrible example because I can't remember what it is. But it's an example of a battle scene that's like very intense. I think it might be the scene of Eowyn versus the Witch King, but I'm not sure. And it literally just said in the script, they fight. And then you get to set and you really dive into what that means.
Right.
And there's this difference between they fight and they fight while having a conversation and also trying to trick each other. There's a difference between that. And that's so key. And I think that that's something that visual media does really well. So movies, a fight sequence is almost never just a fight sequence. It has to do more than one thing. And so my rule when I'm writing is that if whatever I'm doing isn't doing at least 3 things, it's not worth doing. So in any given scene, I have to have at least 3 things I want to accomplish with the scene. Otherwise, it's not worth it. It needs to be combined with another scene, or I need to come up with a complication that's going to change the dynamic. So if a scene is only going to, the purpose of the scene is, well, I really need to introduce this setting. I can't just introduce the setting. I have to have some characters in the setting, and they have to be doing something that relates to the setting. But they can't just be hanging out and talking. They also have to be furthering the plot in some way. So I think that's really key, is layering the different pieces of the story and making sure that they all interconnect. Because if I give that scene and it's just, here's some character development, here's a setting, and here's some plot, that's going to be really jarring and boring. But if I have 2 characters fighting over something that's going to further the plot in an interesting setting, they're now all interconnected, and we get how they're all related to each other.
Right.
And I think that's the key. Is, so for example, in that scene, we have 2 characters. We're going to explore character of who these people are, and we find out that they're willing to trick each other. We don't know who the man in black is yet. We don't really know what's going on. We get this great conversation. We also have this really rough terrain. There's a lot that scene is doing other than just giving some character banter. It's building tension. It's also furthering the plot. It is giving us little pieces that are then going to come in handy later.
Right. So let's talk about Buffy a little bit. So I know some people wanted us to, so I don't want to forget about it. So, and that's, oh man, such a huge canon of stuff to talk about. So, let's talk about Buffy herself to start out with. Like, one of the things that I love about her so much is she's not just a vampire slayer, and she's not just a teenager. She's also like a friend navigating growing up. But it is her relationship to her friends that makes her the most interesting.
The episodes that I think have some of the best, they're just the best episodes, really, are episodes where their friendship is in danger. There's, gosh, I don't remember what season it is. It must be season 4. 4? 5? 4? Who knows?
Who's her boyfriend? That helps us narrow it down.
Right. I think it's Riley, so it must be season 4.
That sounds like 4.
Yeah. There's an episode in season 4. It's when Spike is he has the little chip and he can't attack them. But he's like, I know, I can make them fight with each other. And he uses his knowledge of their relationships to pit them against each other. And that is when Buffy is at her most vulnerable. And some of the most terrifying stuff in Buffy is when her friends aren't on her side, because you know that they're so strong together, and that when they aren't together, something's going to go wrong. And so that sort of thing is Spike looking at the situation, analyzing it, realizing what the viewer realizes, and being like, I'm going to screw that up.
You know what was interesting? I actually thought, because I had some time this week, I was just going to go look at like the top 10 or 20 Buffy episode lists online. And I didn't go too far, because most of the lists I found were listing episodes that, for the most part, the cast were playing characters other than themselves. So like the one Halloween episode where they were their Halloween characters and they weren't themselves.
And I mean, those are all my favorites. The one Tabula Rasa, where they all forget who they are. And Spike thinks that he's Giles's son, Randy. So funny. It's so good. And then the one where Willow has the power. Is it Willow? Yeah, I think Willow has the power to speak. Anything she speaks comes true. And Buffy and Spike think that they're engaged. And it's hysterical.
That was so funny.
And it's so funny. But I think that that's because we know those characters so well. Those episodes on their own can't stand up. It's why they're all in the later seasons and not in the first 3 seasons. You know, those seasons we have to build these characters in order to then make this joke later.
Right. Because the jokes work because those new characters are in conflict to who they actually are. And in a way, it shows us who they really are just by highlighting what they're not, which is really interesting.
I think that's something that TV can do really interesting, in a really interesting way. TV or book series, when you have multiple opportunities to showcase a character where their arc can change. Usually with like a first book or a first season of a show, it's a very specific character arc that needs to be completed, and you have to get from point A to point B. But then once you've completed the first season or so, then you can start riffing on what you've already created. And there's this really interesting interplay of characters and how they change and different things that it can impact them. But then they revert back to their default. And I think that that's something that it's kind of unique to a series, episodic writing.
Yeah. And it's been interesting how episodic writing has grown over the last 20 to 30 years. I'm actually rewatching Star Trek Voyager right now, which hails back to the time where there really wasn't too much over seasons arcs, either in the story or in character. But there's just a little hint of like that's where television writing is going. And seeing the really subtle character arcs that they're making, it's really interesting to watch. But
So a show that it has an interesting way of dealing with character that's actually tangentially related to Buffy because it's also Joss Whedon who, is exhausting right now in the media, but oh well, is Dollhouse.
oh yeah.
It's one of his lesser known shows. It came out in like 2010 or something like that, 2009 maybe. And it is a show about a character who wears the personalities of many characters throughout the course of the story. And what's interesting about that is that we get to know this character underneath these other layers throughout the story. So we basically take this idea of Tabula Rasa, the episode where Buffy and her friends are all different characters, and we create an entire show off of that without knowing the character to begin with. And that's a really risky thing to do because in order to be emotionally invested in a character, you have to grow to understand them before you can then turn it on its head.
Right.
But this show turns it on its head from episode 1, and we get to know this character as a character in a situation that she wouldn't normally be in, and then we learn that she's not real, that she's got a fake personality basically. And then throughout the show, we build on that and we get to know her underneath all of these as the story goes on, which makes for a really interesting storytelling method, I think.
Yeah, no, I loved Dollhouse, and it was so frustrating because they killed it right when it was really getting
going
good.
I think it could have used one more season.
Yeah, at least one more, because that's the kind of story where you have to put in a lot of legwork to get everybody in the car, so to speak. Like I like the analogy of you use act 1 of the story to get the audience in the car with you, so they're invested and they're on the trip with you. But like if you just like take off without them, they don't care. And Dollhouse was one where it took over a season to really get you in the car with the story and to be really invested in the characters.
Once that final episode of season 1 came out, the first epitaph episode where you realize that it's all leading up to something much, much bigger, that's when the first season is like there's good it's a good TV, but you don't really know where it's going till then. And that's when you're like, oh, this is going somewhere much bigger. And I think it could have used one more season to really wrap up that ending of season 2 because that was really rushed. But
cool. So we've talked about archetype, we've talked about arcs. On my show last week, I talked about the kind of like questions? Oh, we have some questions. Yeah, I can't see them for some reason.
Sonata says that's too complicated having more than one hero in a classic that old. And also Aragorn, which agree. What a mood that is. Aragorn.
Aragorn, all the things. Every time I think of Aragorn, I think of the story of him kicking the helmet and breaking his toe.
Right?
This is the automatic thing that my brain does every time I think.
What's so funny to me is that is not only peak Viggo Mortensen, it's also just peak Aragorn.
Right? That's exactly what he would do.
I know. Lord of the Rings is a great example for archetypes because that has multiple different types of heroes.
Right.
And so we have, Frodo is a hero. We have Aragorn, who's a hero. We have, I would say Sam is a hero. And they all fill very different roles of heroicism. Heroics, heroism. That's the word.
Hey, words is the thing we do. We should know this.
We're good at this. But yeah, they all fill different roles within that. And then you also have the mentor character of Gandalf filling many different mentorship roles throughout the story. He's a mentor to Frodo at one point. He's also a mentor to Bilbo in the prequel.
Right.
But then we also see him being a mentor to Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli in the second one. And then we see him being a mentor to Pippin in the third in a very poignant way. And it's a different mentorship in each situation.
So it's interesting because right now in the novel that I'm writing, I am going back, and for me, it's part 1 of a 3-book series. And I'm actually breaking down my protagonist first because I need to flesh out the character more. And also one of the supporting characters that I have to do a lot of work on, because I was essentially playing the long game with that character and wasn't giving them enough of an arc in the first book.
Yeah, the long game is so dangerous with novel writing because you never know if you're actually going to get that long game or not.
Right.
And that's a lesson that I had to learn the hard way, because I keep doing this thing where I write out an outline for a book and I'm like, great, this is fun, but the sequel is going to be even better. And then it's, okay, well, wait, why am I saving that for the sequel? Why am I not just writing that book? And I realized that the sequel I meant to write is actually my Act 3.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that's not where my headspace is. But what I'm doing right now is I'm using the Heroines Journey, which Robin Lefevre talks about. I don't know if you've encountered it yet. It's an excellent point of view of the hero's journey and how it's different for a female character based on our culture and all that kind of stuff. And I was breaking it down, and not only in the 9 beats of the whole journey for the 1 book, but then I'm like, okay, back up. Does this book also function as the first 3 beats of a longer 9-beat arc over the course of 3 books? And looking at it through that lens today, I had like a huge epiphany about my character, the things I need to do with her. And I know I've talked about it on the show before, but this is like the instance of using tools like the hero's journey or archetypes and that kind of stuff as tools to solve problems instead of just like something that you brutally copy. So that makes me want to ask, like, what's one of your favorite tools that you use to think critically and to problem solve in your toolbox?
Ooh. So my favorite tool to problem solve. Ooh. I mean, 3-act structure is really my bread and butter as far as my toolbox goes. If ever I'm feeling like I'm straying from the path, looking at 3-act structure is really where I get back on track. But one of my favorite tools to use when I'm like, are we talking about character specifically?
Yeah, let's talk about character.
Yeah. So in talking about character specifically, I find that character gets off the rails when plot is driving character rather than character driving plot. And so the tool that I like to use is a way of tracking character motivation throughout the story. And basically, this is very complicated. And when you said tools, I don't think this is exactly what you meant, but here we are.
Go for it. Go for it.
I make a spreadsheet, and it is a list of every scene that happens in the story. And in each scene, I list everything that happens. And then in that list, I have to separate out the things that happen to the character and the things that happen because the character does something.
Oh, that's genius.
And so I go through and I highlight the events that occur because of character action and look at the events that happen to the character and look at that balance. And if the balance is off in some areas, I'm going to find, oh, you know what? The character doesn't really start acting on her own until the end of Act 1. That's a problem. She's really passive in Act 1. I need to make her more active. So what I need to do at that point is evaluate what the character's motivations are, what she wants, why she's doing what she's doing, and make her act on that. I find that this is really, really common with manuscripts that I end up evaluating for like an agent or for mentorship and things like that, where the first act, the character is learning to be an active character. Mm-hmm. And they're super passive through Act 1 because they have to learn to be active, or because the Act 1 twist is what's going to push them to be active. But I think that if they're passive about the plot, they have to be active about something else. So they have to be acting in some way, even if it's counter to the plot. So if the plot is pushing them in one direction, they should be pushing against it. and that creates more tension and more narrative interest than if they just follow the plot.
Right.
So if
Yeah,
the plot is
I actually talked about that on my blog a couple weeks ago because I broke down Star Wars: A New Hope.
Yeah.
With the hero's journey and also 3-act structure. And I really talked about how, like, if you just use 3-act structure, it can be very much outside in. And what I like considering both 3-act structure with the hero's journey is it helps me remember to make my main character more proactive. And like in Star Wars: A New Hope, there's a very clear moment, like when his aunt and uncle are killed, that's when he decides to finally take action. And he isn't necessarily forced to take action. I mean, he could technically stay on Tatooine and be miserable for the rest of his life, but he finally allows himself to do what he wants and to go out and seek adventure and save the day.
Yeah.
And the first clear example of him taking leadership is when he convinces Han Solo to help him save Leia on the Death Star. And what's interesting is that happens when Obi-Wan has already left to go turn off the tractor beam. And so Luke has really like taken the initiative to go be a hero. But I wonder, like, if Obi-Wan had died already, I'm not sure he would have been able to do that. I think like Obi-Wan is very much a safety net that allows him to feel stronger and braver, which is why it's so powerful when Obi-Wan dies at the end of Act 2.
I think Star Wars is an interesting example because it's classic 3-act structure. It's classic character archetypes. I mean, it's a classic for a reason. But it doesn't, it's a great example of the standardized version of plot and character. And it is not, I would say, an innovative use of plot and character.
It is no.
And I think what's so funny about that is that people keep expecting it to be. They keep going to these Star Wars movies and being like, that was so predictable. And you're like, well, of course it was. It's a Star Wars movie. Like, have you not seen the original trilogy? It's brilliant. It's masterful storytelling, but it's a masterful storytelling that uses the most basic storytelling method possible. And it's really smart and it's really good, but it's not breaking the mold. It's not like people are saying that, you know, they wanted, like, I like, we all know Kylo Ren is going to get a redemption arc. We've seen the first trilogy. We also saw the prequels. Like, we know that that's the story. And you know, people who are expecting him to not get a redemption arc or whatever, that's wishful thinking, because Star Wars isn't about breaking that storytelling structure. It's about using it to its full advantage.
Right. And basically giving us the same story over and over again with a slightly different twist. And it's interesting because I know, like, some people hated that episode 7 was so much like episode 4. And I'm like, no, I was nostalgic. I needed that. That was amazing.
Loved it.
By the way, tturtle.com has a new Porg t-shirt where there are like 3 Porgs chasing and like jumping on BB-8, and it's
I truly
beautiful.
love Porgs. I know that the internet is split on them, but good job.
They're great. Oh man, there's this store at Washington Square, and I sent you a picture of me standing under the giant Porg.
Oh yeah.
And it's like my height, and it's alarming. Like, I don't. Anyways, so I think we should probably start wrapping up.
Yeah.
So,
anyone has questions? I don't know.
Rosie can see the questions in theory. I can't.
Yeah.
So if you have any questions, please ask them. Otherwise, we've been talking about character, archetypes, and arcs in the context of like Princess Bride, a little bit of Buffy. We also went and did some Thor Ragnarok. It's a good film.
Oh, I should mention that tool that I was talking about, the charting character motivation.
Oh, yes.
I actually have a blog post on that on the Be Your Own Mentor website. So that's byomentor.com. It's a website where I basically harass my friends into writing about things they're smart about and giving homework assignments to aspiring writers. So you can check that out. But I had a post on that back last fall on how to use that tool and how to track it.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I love using spreadsheets. I have an Airtable that could choke a
Love
horse
Airtable.
right now
So
for
good.
my and I love it because I'm also using it for feedback because it has the ability to like create forms and stuff. So I was able to just integrate my alpha reader feedback straight back into my database for my novel, and it's been super helpful. Yeah. So any last thoughts on the characters of the Princess Bride that we didn't get to talk about? Because we didn't talk about Fezzik.
We didn't talk about Fezzik, and we didn't talk about Humperdinck.
No. Ooh. Let's close it out by talking about Humperdinck.
Yeah. Oh, Humperdinck. The worst name of anyone in The Princess Bride.
Right. But on purpose.
I actually do have a last thought about The Princess Bride, but it's not about Humperdinck. So let's talk about Humperdinck first, and then I do have another thought.
Okay. So, I don't know. What would you say is, besides being the villain, what function is he playing in the story?
So I think in the story of Buttercup, if we're treating her like the hero, he plays the dark angel on her shoulder, and Wesley plays the good angel on her shoulder.
Mm.
And what we have is a push and pull of believing or not believing in true love.
Right.
And his role is to cast doubt for her. He's the one who tells her Wesley's not coming. He's the one who continually ignores true love as a concept and is therefore giving credence to her doubt. And so that's the role I think he plays in that particular arc. I don't think he plays much of an arc for Inigo.
No, that's
neither does the six-fingered man.
him.
They're both, I would say they're both pretty weak villains.
Mm-hmm.
And they rely heavily on villain tropes in order to make the viewer fear them.
Mm-hmm.
Or fear for the characters because of them.
Right. Yeah. So what was your final thought on The Princess Bride?
So my final thought on The Princess Bride is that we are chasing ourselves in circles trying to decide who the main character is, because we should all know by now that the main character is just the little boy reading the book.
Yeah, it was interesting because I went in to watch it again, thinking about Buttercup's arc, or the hope of one that doesn't really actually go anywhere.
He gets the arc she should have had.
Exactly. Yeah, because it starts out with the grandson, not wanting to be read to by his grandfather, not wanting any kissing scenes. He just wants the fights. And then at the end, he totally wants Wesley and Buttercup to kiss, and he gets Buttercup's arc. And I was just like, oh man. And it would have made Buttercup's arc so much better if she had completed it.
Well, and that's the difference between the book and the movie.
I actually have never read the book. I need to fix that.
It's fine, I guess. I'm gonna get killed by the internet.
Okay.
I mean, it's older and it's the writing is more antiquated and it's just not really my jam. But Buttercup gets even less of an arc there, because even the arc that she should have had doesn't even get given to a young boy. It's just not there.
Right.
So it's a further distancing of her as a fully fledged character, I think.
Right. Yeah. Oh, it was such a really brilliant narrative device to use the grandfather and the grandson
Yeah.
in the film, because it is kind of like the buy-in to the fantastical world. Because like if we were to have just taken that out, and as an audience we needed to believe in true love like just all the way, like it gives us a distancing from that really fantastical idea that is irrational.
It also gives permission for the fantastical world to be like absurd,
right?
Because when you go into a movie or a book and the fantastical world just is absurd, it's very jarring.
Right.
It's why Alice in Wonderland works, because Alice comes from a world that's very ordered, and then she goes to a world that's complete nonsense. And so you the reader are experiencing this world through her.
Right.
But if we just were telling stories about what happens in Wonderland and we had no Alice through which to see it, it would just feel like complete mumbo jumbo. It would be just ridiculous. And so having that lens through which to see this fantastical world, especially with a very absurdist kind of comedy about it, that really helps. Oftentimes, we go to a fantastical world like the Lord of the Rings. We don't have an everyman who is our buy-in to the world. But that world isn't meant to be absurd. It's meant to be believable because it's based on real mythology.
Right.
Whereas this, Princess Bride world is barely fleshed out. The characters are archetypes, and the story is, kind of unbelievable. But it's okay because we have this distancing mechanism that allows us to buy into it.
Right. And just for another example for people, like Harry Potter is that everyman character that introduces us to the wizarding world. And what's neat about in The Princess Bride, the grandfather and the grandson, it gives us an everyman into the world without having that character in the world.
Yes, exactly.
Because like if the grandfather were to appear inside that,
it would be very ridiculous.
World, it would be terrible.
It would break the story.
Yeah.
Because it would break the film of disbelief. Because what it gives us is it gives us this buy-in of this world is fake because it's in a book. You don't actually have to believe in it. We don't even believe in it, so it's fine. But if for whatever reason they got sucked into the book, it would have to have a sense of realism to it, and it doesn't. It's meant to be this kind of cheesy humor-based world. It's not meant to be have a bunch of depth and really be. I mean, we get 2 country names, like yeah,
Lord and Gilder.
Yeah, it's meant to be kind of absurd and unbelievable, and that's okay. So
yeah, cool.
My dog would like me to feed her.
So this has been amazing. Thank you again for joining me. I think this has been super fun and interesting, getting to nerd out with you. For everyone's information, Rosie and I got on the call at like 5:45, and we both were like barely speaking to each other because we were so tired. But then we started talking about writing, and I know I feel a lot more awake than I did when we first got on.
So I feel like I can go do something now.
Yeah, we feel alive again because we love writing and we love talking about this stuff. Are there any questions that popped up?
Nope.
Nope. We're good.
Just the last thing I saw is Sonata saying Aragorn with 2 exclamation points. Correct.
Very exciting. I loved that episode of Witch Please. That was like the spoof Christmas episode where they were talking about Lord of the Rings. Do you remember that one?
Oh, hang on. My computer just froze.
Oh no.
Say that again. Sorry.
I loved that episode of Witch Please. That was like as if they were a Lord of the Rings podcast. Do you remember that one?
I don't know if I saw that one or if I listened to that one. Is that one newer? I haven't been.
No, it's older. It's I think it was like a Christmas special or something.
Oh, it was okay. I'll have to go back. I have listened to all of their episodes so many times because it's such a good podcast. If anyone is interested in critical analysis of literature, the Oh Witch Please podcast is phenomenal. It's two Canadian lit scholars who discuss Harry Potter through the lens of current social lenses, and it's so good.
Yeah, and they talk both about the books and the films. And then in the most recent season, they actually also went to the film park, or the theme park, sorry, and they've seen Cursed Child. And so, like, they talk about all the stuff, and it's great. Yeah, so thank you again for joining me. I'll probably be back next week talking about more things. We'll see what that ends up being like, and hopefully you'll join us again sometime when you're less busy. Awesome. All right. Good night, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Catch you later. Bye.